Marcus Davidson slammed his coffee mug down with such force that the scalding liquid erupted like a miniature volcano, splashing across the mahogany conference table and directly onto Charlotte Williams's pristine white blouse. 23 executives sat frozen in stunned silence as the dark stain spread across the expensive fabric. Their quarterly review meeting suddenly transformed into a battlefield none of them had seen coming. "You worthless intern!" Marcus's voice thundered through the glass-walled conference room on the 42nd floor of Elite Dynamics' Seattle headquarters. "How dare you question my financial projections?" But here's what made everyone's blood run cold. Charlotte didn't flinch. Instead, she dabbed the coffee stain with a cloth napkin, her movements precise and unhurried, while something that looked suspiciously like a smile played at the corners of her mouth. For just a split second, the fluorescent lights caught the gleam of what appeared to be an extremely expensive Cartier watch peeking from beneath her blazer's sleeve. If you've ever been in a workplace where bullies think their position gives them the right to humiliate others, you know that sick feeling in your stomach when you witness it happening. That moment when you wonder if you'd have the courage to speak up, or if you'd just sit there like everyone else, pretending it wasn't happening. What Charlotte did next would make you rethink everything you know about power, respect, and the price of staying silent. Charlotte Williams was supposed to be nobody special, just another 22-year-old intern grinding through the summer program at one of Seattle's most prestigious tech companies. She'd arrived 3 months ago with the standard intern package. A tiny cubicle in the corner, coffee-fetching duties, and the kind of invisible status that made most employees look right through her. But from day one, something had felt different about this particular intern. Maybe it was the way she carried herself, spine straight and shoulders back like someone who'd never learned to shrink. Or perhaps it was how she listened during meetings, not with the eager desperation of someone trying to impress, but with the calculated attention of someone taking notes for a very different purpose. The other interns whispered that she must come from money, given her designer accessories and the fact that she never seemed stressed about the unpaid position that left most of them surviving on ramen noodles. Marcus Davidson had built his reputation as Elite Dynamics' most feared department head through 15 years of systematic intimidation. His corner office overlooking Elliott Bay serving as a monument to the kind of old-school corporate brutality that somehow still thrived in progressive Seattle. At 51, he possessed the particular brand of cruelty that came from someone who'd climbed the ladder by stepping on others. His 6'2" frame and booming voice perfect tools for making smaller, younger employees feel worthless. His lieutenant in workplace terrorism was Rebecca Martinez, the 38-year-old senior manager whose own insecurities had been weaponized into a talent for psychological warfare. Rebecca had perfected the art of death by 1,000 cuts. Her attacks disguised as helpful feedback or constructive criticism while she slowly eroded her victim's confidence. Together, Marcus and Rebecca had created a department culture where fear was the primary motivator, and questioning their authority was tantamount to career suicide. The quarterly review meeting had been proceeding with typical corporate theater, PowerPoint slides filled with optimistic projections, while carefully avoiding the uncomfortable truths about declining market share and questionable accounting practices. Elite Dynamics occupied 4 floors of a gleaming downtown tower, its open-concept workspace designed to project innovation and collaboration while actually serving as a panopticon where every conversation could be monitored and every expression scrutinized. The company had built its reputation on cutting-edge software solutions, but recent years had seen mounting pressure from more agile competitors and whispers about internal financial irregularities. The quarterly reviews had become elaborate performances designed to reassure nervous executives while avoiding any actual accountability. a delicate dance that required everyone to play their assigned roles without deviation. That morning, Charlotte had arrived at 7:30 a.m., an hour before the meeting was scheduled to begin. She'd used the time to review financial documents that she technically shouldn't have had access to. Her Level 7 security clearance, a mystery that the IT department had been trying to solve for weeks. As she sat in the conference room's front row, notebook open and pen ready, something in her posture suggested this wasn't just another intern taking notes for extra credit. When Marcus began his presentation about the company's supposedly stellar third-quarter performance, Charlotte's expression remained neutral, even as the numbers clearly didn't add up. She watched him click through slides that painted a rosy picture of growth and profitability, while carefully omitting the offshore transfers and creative accounting that made those numbers possible. But when he reached the slide projecting next quarter's revenue, Charlotte did something that nobody expected. She raised her hand. "Excuse me, Mr. Davidson." Her voice cut through his presentation with the kind of quiet confidence that made everyone turn to look. "I think there might be an error in your calculations." The room went dead silent. Interns simply didn't interrupt senior executives during quarterly reviews, especially not to suggest their math was wrong. Marcus's face began to flush red as he processed the audacity of this 22-year-old challenging him in front of the entire leadership team. "I'm sorry. What did you just say?" His voice carried the kind of dangerous quiet that usually preceded an explosion. Charlotte stood up slowly, her movement fluid and controlled as she walked to the front of the room. "Your revenue projection for Q4 shows $18.7 million, but based on current contract values and projected churn rates, the realistic figure would be closer to $14.2 million. The discrepancy appears to stem from including the Morrison Industries contract, which was terminated last month." The silence that followed was deafening. Every person in that room knew that the Morrison Industries contract termination had been kept strictly confidential, known only to the C-suite executives and handled through encrypted communications. There was absolutely no way a summer intern should have had access to that information. Marcus's coffee mug hit the table hard enough to crack, his face now approaching dangerous shades of purple. "How could you possibly know about Morrison Industries? That's classified information." Charlotte's response was to reach into her leather portfolio and produce a printed email chain, laying it gently on the conference table where everyone could see the official Elite Dynamics letterhead. The termination notice was copied to the Financial Oversight Committee, she explained with the patience of a teacher addressing a confused student. "I assume everyone here received that distribution." Several executives shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, realizing that this intern somehow had access to communications they'd assumed were limited to senior leadership. Rebecca Martinez leaned forward with the predatory smile of someone who smelled blood in the water. "Even if you somehow accessed confidential emails," Rebecca's voice dripped with condescension, "you're still just an intern. You don't have the experience or authority to be questioning senior management's financial projections." That's when Charlotte turned to face Rebecca directly, and something in her expression made the older woman's smile falter. "You're absolutely right about my official title," Charlotte said softly. "But experience and authority come in many forms, don't they?" She returned to her seat with the same fluid grace, leaving the printed email chain on the table like evidence in a courtroom. Marcus struggled to regain control of his presentation, but the damage was done. Everyone in the room was now wondering how a summer intern had accessed classified financial information, and more importantly, why her math was probably correct. Ethan Mitchell, the 35-year-old VP of Operations, cleared his throat diplomatically. "Perhaps we should take a closer look at those Q4 projections after the meeting," he suggested, his tone carefully neutral but his eyes fixed on Charlotte with obvious curiosity. For the next 30 minutes, Marcus attempted to continue his presentation while Charlotte took notes with the focused attention of someone building a case file rather than learning about corporate strategy. Every few minutes, she would make a subtle mark in her notebook, and several executives found themselves wondering what exactly she was documenting so carefully. When Marcus finally concluded his presentation with a call for questions, Charlotte raised her hand again. This time, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. "I noticed some interesting patterns in the departmental budget allocations," she began, her voice steady and professional, "particularly in the consulting services line item. Would you mind explaining why external consulting fees have increased by 300% over the past 18 months, while actual deliverables appear to have decreased?" The question landed like a bomb in the middle of the conference table. Marcus's face went through several color changes as he processed the implication, while Rebecca looked like she'd been physically struck. External consulting fees were one of the easiest ways to hide questionable financial transfers, and the fact that this intern had identified the pattern suggested a level of financial sophistication that went far beyond her supposed qualifications. "Those consulting arrangements are complex business relationships," Marcus managed to stammer, his voice noticeably less confident than it had been an hour earlier. "I don't expect an intern to understand the nuances of enterprise-level consulting agreements." Charlotte nodded thoughtfully, as if she were genuinely considering his explanation. "Of course, those relationships can be quite complex. I was particularly curious about the consulting agreement with Meridian Strategic Solutions. They seem to have received over $2 million in fees this year, despite having no listed employees and an address that appears to be a P.O. box in the Cayman Islands." The room temperature seemed to drop by 10 degrees. Meridian Strategic Solutions was supposed to be buried so deep in the company's financial records that even most executives didn't know it existed, let alone understand what it represented. The fact that this intern had not only found it, but connected it to offshore banking suggested either impossible luck or access to information that should have been completely secured. Rebecca jumped into the silence with the desperation of someone trying to stop a dam from bursting. "You're clearly confused about what you're looking at," she said, her voice sharp with barely controlled panic. "Financial documents can be misleading when you don't understand the full context." But Charlotte just smiled, reaching into her portfolio to produce another document. "You're absolutely right about context being important," she agreed pleasantly. "That's why I also pulled the wire transfer records showing the corresponding payments from Meridian back to various personal accounts. Context is everything, isn't it?" The explosion that followed was immediate and spectacular. Marcus lurched to his feet, his chair rolling backward and hitting the wall with a crash that echoed through the glass-walled conference room. "Security!" he bellowed, his voice cracking with rage and what sounded suspiciously like fear. "This intern has clearly hacked into confidential systems. She's committing corporate espionage." But instead of looking frightened or defensive, Charlotte remained perfectly calm. She reached into her blazer pocket and produced a small card, sliding it across the table toward Marcus with the casual gesture of someone playing a trump card they'd been holding all along. "Actually," she said in a voice that somehow carried throughout the room despite being barely above a whisper, "I think you'll find my access codes are completely legitimate." Marcus snatched up the card, his hands shaking slightly as he read whatever was printed there. The color drained from his face so quickly that for a moment it looked like he might actually faint, his eyes widening as he stared at the small piece of plastic like it had just bitten him. This is impossible," he whispered, holding the card up to the light as if checking for forgery. Level 7. Clearance. Only the C-suite has Level 7 clearance. Charlotte stood up slowly, her movement graceful and unhurried as she walked around the conference table to retrieve her access card. As she moved, her blazer fell open slightly, revealing not just the expensive watch they'd glimpsed earlier, but a handbag that several of the female executives recognized as a $15,000 Hermes Birkin bag, the kind of accessory that typically required either serious family money or a corporate salary well into the six figures. Clearance levels can be confusing, Charlotte acknowledged as she slipped the card back into her pocket. But I think you'll find that my authorization is completely valid. Perhaps you'd like to call it to confirm. Rebecca made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob, her carefully constructed facade finally beginning to crack under the pressure. This is insane. She's just an intern. Interns don't carry Hermes bags, and they definitely don't have executive-level security clearance. The room buzzed with whispered conversations as executives tried to process what they were witnessing. The intern they'd all been ignoring for 3 months was clearly not what she seemed, but nobody could quite piece together what was actually happening. Some of them had started taking pictures of Charlotte with their phones, as if documenting the moment for later analysis. Charlotte returned to her seat, crossing her legs with the kind of casual elegance that suggested she was far more comfortable in corporate boardrooms than her supposed intern status would indicate. "I understand this must be confusing," she said, addressing the room with the confident tone of someone accustomed to being listened to. "But I think we should focus on the financial irregularities rather than my qualifications to identify them." Ethan Mitchell leaned forward, his expression a mixture of confusion and growing respect. "Charlotte, I think we're all wondering exactly who you are and how you came to be in possession of this information." Before Charlotte could respond, her phone buzzed with an incoming text message. She glanced down at the screen, and for the first time all morning, her perfect composure showed the slightest crack. Whatever message she'd just received had clearly changed her calculations about how much to reveal. She looked up from her phone, her eyes scanning the faces around the conference table as if making some kind of final assessment. Then she reached into her portfolio one more time, producing a document that made Marcus actually stumble backward when he saw the letterhead. "Perhaps," Charlotte said quietly, "it's time for complete transparency." The document she placed on the table was printed on official Williams Corporation letterhead, the company logo immediately recognizable to everyone in the room as belonging to one of the largest privately held corporations in the Pacific Northwest. But it was the signature at the bottom that made Marcus's knees buckle, his hand grabbing the edge of the table for support as he read the name that had just turned his world upside down. Samuel J. Williams, CEO and chairman of Williams Corporation. The man who had been quietly buying up Seattle tech companies for the past 2 years, including several smaller firms that competed directly with Elite Dynamics. The man whose acquisition rumors had been keeping every tech executive in the city awake at night, wondering if their company would be next. "Oh my God," whispered Rebecca, her voice barely audible as the pieces finally started falling into place. Williams Corporation just acquired Data Tech Solutions last month, and they've been buying up everyone in our market segment. Charlotte nodded calmly, as if she were confirming something as mundane as the weather forecast. Market consolidation is a complex process that requires detailed understanding of target companies' operations, financial health, and cultural dynamics. Sometimes the best way to gain that understanding is through direct observation. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the distant hum of air conditioning and the muffled sounds of Seattle traffic 42 floors below. Every person in that room was processing the same impossible realization. The intern they'd been dismissing for 3 months was connected to the corporate predator that had been systematically acquiring their competitors. Marcus finally found his voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. "You're saying that Williams Corporation is investigating elite dynamics, that you're here as some kind of corporate spy?" Charlotte's expression remained neutral, but there was something in her eyes that suggested she was enjoying this moment more than she was letting on. "I prefer the term strategic assessment specialist, and I wouldn't say I'm investigating the company so much as experiencing it from the perspective of your most vulnerable employees." She gestured toward her intern badge, still clipped to her blazer despite everything that had just been revealed. There's no better way to understand a company's true culture than to spend time at the bottom of the hierarchy. You learn who treats people with respect, regardless of their title, and who uses their position to bully and intimidate those they perceive as powerless. Rebecca was now visibly trembling, her hands shaking as she reached for her water glass. "This is entrapment. You deliberately deceived us about who you are." "I never lied about anything," Charlotte replied calmly. "I applied for the internship program under my real name, submitted my actual academic credentials, and have been performing all the duties assigned to me. The fact that you assumed my background and capabilities based on my job title says more about your biases than my honesty." Ethan Mitchell had been quiet throughout this exchange, but now he leaned forward with obvious fascination. "Charlotte, if I may ask, what exactly is your relationship to Williams Corporation? Because if you're conducting some kind of acquisition assessment, there are legal protocols that typically govern that process." Charlotte turned to face him directly, and for the first time that morning, her smile seemed genuinely warm rather than strategically deployed. "You're absolutely right about legal protocols, Mr. Mitchell, and I appreciate that you've been one of the few people in this company to treat me with basic professional respect, regardless of my supposed intern status." She reached into her portfolio once more, this time producing what appeared to be a business card. But when she handed it to Ethan, his expression immediately changed from curiosity to shock. "C. Williams, Strategic Assessment Consultant," he read aloud, his voice growing stronger as he processed the implications. "Williams Corporation Executive Development Program." Marcus made a sound like a wounded animal, grabbing the edge of the conference table as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. "Executive Development Program. What does that mean? Who are you really?" Charlotte stood up slowly, her movement graceful and deliberate as she walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay. For a long moment, she stood with her back to the room, and when she finally turned around, something fundamental had changed in her demeanor. The deferential intern mask had finally been completely discarded, replaced by the confident bearing of someone accustomed to commanding rooms full of powerful people. "The Executive Development Program is designed to give future leaders hands-on experience with all aspects of corporate operations," she explained, her voice now carrying an authority that made several executives sit up straighter in their chairs. "Participants spend time in various roles throughout target companies, learning everything from frontline operations to executive decision-making." She walked back toward the conference table, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor with the measured rhythm of someone who owned every step. "The program also serves as an assessment tool for potential acquisitions. We learn about company culture, operational efficiency, financial practices, and leadership quality." Rebecca's voice came out as a strangled whisper. "Assessment tool? Are you saying that Williams Corporation is considering acquiring elite dynamics?" Charlotte paused next to her chair, but didn't sit down. Instead, she placed her hands on the back of the chair and surveyed the room with the calculating gaze of someone taking inventory. "Acquisition decisions depend on many factors," she said carefully. "Financial performance is obviously important, but cultural compatibility and leadership quality are equally significant considerations." Marcus finally managed to stand up straight, though his face remained pale and his hands continued to shake. "This is corporate espionage. You infiltrated our company under false pretenses. There have to be laws against this kind of deception." "Actually," Charlotte's voice remained perfectly calm, "everything I've done has been completely legal and transparent. I applied for an internship position using my real name and legitimate credentials. I've performed all assigned duties and followed all company policies. The fact that I happen to be connected to Williams Corporation doesn't invalidate my presence here." She reached into her blazer pocket and produced her phone, scrolling through what appeared to be a series of text messages. "In fact, I've been in regular communication with my supervisors throughout this assessment period, providing updates on operational efficiency, financial practices, and workplace culture." The room buzzed with urgent whispered conversations as executives tried to process the implications of what they were hearing. The intern they'd been ignoring had been documenting everything, from financial irregularities to incidents of workplace bullying, and reporting it all back to one of the most powerful corporations in the region. Ethan Mitchell broke the silence with a question that cut straight to the heart of everyone's fears. "Charlotte, when you say you've been assessing workplace culture, what exactly have you been documenting?" Charlotte's smile was answer enough, but she elaborated anyway. "Every interaction, every meeting, every decision that reflects the company's true values rather than its stated policies. The way senior managers treat subordinates, how conflicts are resolved, whether there's a pattern of favoritism or discrimination." She looked directly at Marcus, her gaze steady and unwavering. "For example, I've documented 17 separate instances of verbal harassment directed at junior employees by senior management. I've recorded meetings where budget discrepancies were deliberately obscured, and I've witnessed systematic intimidation used to silence employees who raised legitimate concerns." Marcus's face had gone from pale to gray, and he was now gripping the conference table so tightly that his knuckles were white. "You've been recording us without consent. That's illegal." "Washington is a two-party consent state for audio recordings," Charlotte acknowledged, "which is why I've relied primarily on written documentation, email chains, and witness statements, although I should mention that several employees have voluntarily provided their own recordings of incidents they felt were inappropriate." Rebecca made a choking sound, her hand flying to her throat as if she couldn't breathe. "Witness statements. What employees? What incidents?" Charlotte's expression remained neutral, but there was steel in her voice when she responded. "Employees who felt safe enough to come forward after realizing that someone was finally paying attention to the way they were being treated. People who had been afraid to speak up because they believed nothing would change." She turned to address the room generally, her voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made everyone lean forward to listen. "It's amazing how differently people behave when they think no one important is watching, but it's equally remarkable how quickly they're willing to share their experiences when they believe someone might actually care about creating change." The silence that followed was broken by the sound of Marcus's chair hitting the wall as he stumbled backward, his face a mask of rage and terror as he processed the full implications of what Charlotte was saying. "This is a setup. You came here to destroy us, to gather evidence for some kind of hostile takeover." Charlotte shook her head slowly, her expression almost pitying. "I came here to learn, Mr. Davidson. to understand how this company operates and whether it would be a good fit for Williams Corporation's portfolio. The evidence of financial impropriety and cultural toxicity. That was all provided by your own actions. She gestured toward the documents still scattered across the conference table. The offshore accounts, the inflated consulting fees, the systematic harassment of employees, none of that was planted or fabricated. You created that evidence through your own choices, your own decisions about how to treat the people under your authority. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, the conference room door opened and 3 people in dark suits walked in. Their bearing and the way they surveyed the room immediately identified them as security personnel, and when the lead figure spoke, his voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Ms. Williams," the man said, nodding respectfully toward Charlotte. "We received your message. Are you ready for us to proceed?" Charlotte glanced around the room one more time, her gaze lingering on each face as if memorizing this moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady and professional, carrying the weight of decisions that had clearly been made long before this meeting ever began. "Yes," she said simply. "I think it's time." The lead security officer nodded, then turned to address Marcus directly. "Mr. Davidson, I'm going to need you to step away from the conference table and come with us. You're being terminated immediately, and we need to secure your access cards and company property before you leave the building." The explosion of protests and panicked questions that followed echoed through the glass-walled conference room, but Charlotte remained perfectly calm in the center of the storm she had just unleashed. As security moved to escort Marcus from the building, she gathered her documents with the unhurried efficiency of someone whose real work was just beginning. But as the conference room door closed behind Marcus's departing figure, Charlotte's phone buzzed with another message that made her pause. She read the text quickly, then looked up at the remaining executives with an expression that suggested this confrontation was far from over. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said quietly, "there's something else we need to discuss." The remaining executives sat frozen in their chairs as Charlotte's phone continued to buzz with incoming messages, each notification seeming to carry the weight of additional revelations that would further shatter their understanding of the morning's events. Rebecca Martinez had gone completely pale. Her carefully applied makeup now streaked with perspiration as she realized that Marcus's departure was only the beginning of what promised to be a complete institutional reckoning. "The message I just received," Charlotte began, her voice cutting through the tense silence like a blade through silk, "is from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. They've been investigating Elite Dynamics offshore banking activities for the past 8 months, and they're ready to move forward with formal charges." Ethan Mitchell leaned forward, his expression a mixture of fascination and growing concern. "Charlotte, I have to ask, what exactly is your relationship to Williams Corporation? Because the level of coordination you're describing suggests something far more significant than a student internship program." Charlotte walked back to her seat, but remained standing as she surveyed the faces around the conference table. When she finally spoke, her words carried the weight of a truth that would reshape everything they thought they knew about power, privilege, and the price of institutional corruption. "Samuel Williams is my father," she said simply, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the revelation. "Williams Corporation has been conducting due diligence on Elite Dynamics for potential acquisition, but my presence here served a dual purpose. We needed to understand not just the financial structure, but the human cost of the toxic culture that Marcus and Rebecca have cultivated." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of Rebecca's sharp intake of breath and the distant hum of Seattle traffic far below. Several executives reached for their phones, undoubtedly calculating the implications of having spent 3 months dismissing and occasionally mistreating the daughter of one of the most powerful business leaders in the Pacific Northwest. "But here's what matters more than my last name," Charlotte continued, her gaze moving from face to face around the table.
In 3 months of working as your intern, I witnessed 17 documented incidents of workplace harassment, systematic financial fraud totaling over $4 million, and a culture of fear that has driven away some of your most talented employees. She reached into her portfolio and produced a thick folder, setting it on the conference table with the decisive gesture of someone playing their final card. This contains detailed documentation of every incident, witness statements from current and former employees, and financial records that paint a clear picture of institutionalized corruption. Ethan Mitchell stood up slowly, his expression reflecting the dawning realization that he was witnessing a corporate reckoning of unprecedented scope. "Charlotte, what happens next to the company? To the employees who had nothing to do with Marcus's schemes?" Charlotte's expression softened for the first time all morning, revealing something that looked almost like genuine warmth beneath her professional composure. "That depends on the choices made by the people in this room. Williams Corporation isn't interested in destroying elite dynamics. We're interested in transforming it into the kind of company it has the potential to become." She walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing out at Elliott Bay while the remaining executives processed the implications of her words. "The technology you've developed here is genuinely innovative, and most of your employees are talented, dedicated professionals who deserve better leadership than they've received." Rebecca finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "What about those of us who were part of Marcus's system? What happens to us?" Charlotte turned back to face the room, her expression neither vindictive nor forgiving, but something more complex that spoke to the kind of measured judgment that came with real authority. "That depends on your willingness to acknowledge what happened here and commit to fundamental change. Some bridges can be rebuilt. Others are too damaged to repair." She returned to the conference table, placing her hands flat on its surface as she addressed each person directly. "Rebecca, your involvement in the harassment and financial schemes makes your position untenable. You'll be terminated immediately, though Williams Corporation won't pursue criminal charges if you cooperate fully with the ongoing investigation." Rebecca's face crumpled, but she nodded numbly as the reality of her situation finally sank in completely. "Mr. Mitchell." Charlotte's tone shifted as she turned to Ethan. "You've consistently demonstrated the kind of leadership this company needs. If you're willing, Williams Corporation would like to offer you the position of interim CEO while we complete the cultural transformation process." Ethan's eyes widened in surprise, but his response was immediate and decisive. "I accept, with the understanding that any leadership role comes with the responsibility to ensure that what happened here never happens again." Charlotte smiled, and for the first time all morning, it was completely genuine. "Excellent. Your first priority will be implementing new policies that protect employees from harassment and create transparent channels for reporting misconduct." She reached into her blazer pocket and produced her intern badge, looking at it thoughtfully before clipping it back onto her lapel. "But here's something that might surprise you. I'm staying." The room erupted in confused murmurs as executives tried to process this unexpected announcement. Charlotte raised her hand for silence, her gesture carrying the kind of natural authority that made everyone immediately stop talking. "Cultural transformation doesn't happen overnight," she explained. "It requires sustained effort and constant vigilance. I'll be completing my 3-month internship as originally planned, not as an undercover investigator.
but as someone committed to helping build the kind of workplace where respect isn't determined by job titles. She looked around the room one final time, her gaze settling on each face with the weight of someone who had just fundamentally altered the trajectory of their professional lives. The best leaders aren't those who demand respect through fear and intimidation. They're the ones who earn it by lifting others up, by creating environments where everyone can thrive regardless of their position in the hierarchy, as if orchestrated by some unseen director. The conference room door opened and the head of security returned, this time accompanied by representatives from Williams Corporation's legal team. But instead of the tense confrontation everyone expected, Charlotte walked over to shake hands with each new arrival, her demeanor relaxed and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced to the room, "meet your new oversight team. They'll be working with Mr. Mitchell to implement the policy changes necessary to transform Elite Dynamics into the kind of company that truly values its employees." Word of the morning's events spread through Elite Dynamics like wildfire, carried by whispered conversations in break rooms and urgent text messages between colleagues. By noon, the entire company knew that the quiet intern who'd been fetching coffee and organizing files had somehow orchestrated the downfall of their most feared executives. But more importantly, they began to understand that someone had finally been listening to their complaints, documenting their experiences, and taking their concerns seriously. Sarah Chen, a junior developer who'd been repeatedly overlooked for promotions despite her exceptional work, found herself crying tears of relief in the bathroom as she realized that the hostile environment she'd endured for 2 years was finally going to change. David Rodriguez, a project manager who had been afraid to speak up about Marcus's verbal abuse, felt a weight lift from his shoulders as he understood that his experiences had been validated and documented. The transformation wasn't immediate or magical, but it was real. Over the following weeks, employees who had been silent for months began sharing their stories, offering suggestions for improvement, and rebuilding the collaborative spirit that had been systematically destroyed by Marcus's reign of terror. Trust had to be earned incrementally, through consistent actions rather than grand gestures, but the foundation for genuine change had finally been established. 6 months later, the same conference room hosted a very different kind of quarterly review. Ethan Mitchell stood at the head of the table, presenting financial results that reflected not just improved profitability, but dramatically increased employee satisfaction and retention rates. Charlotte Williams sat in the same front-row seat she'd occupied as an intern, but now her business card read Director of Cultural Development, and her presence represented hope rather than hidden threat. The transformation hadn't been easy, and not everyone had survived the cultural shift that followed Marcus's departure. But those who remained had discovered something remarkable, that treating people with respect actually improved business outcomes, and that the best leaders were indeed those who lifted others up rather than tearing them down. As Charlotte stood to present the quarterly culture assessment, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The coffee stain on her white blouse had long since been cleaned, but the memory of that morning served as a powerful reminder that change often begins with someone refusing to accept unacceptable behavior, regardless of the personal cost or professional risk involved. Sometimes the most powerful lessons come disguised as ordinary moments, hidden within the daily interactions that reveal who we really are when we think no one important is watching. Charlotte Williams had spent 3 months proving that everyone is important, that respect isn't earned through titles or intimidation, but through the simple act of treating others with dignity, regardless of their position. If this story resonates with your own experiences in toxic workplaces, you're not alone in recognizing the patterns that Charlotte exposed. Real change happens when enough people decide that staying silent is no longer an option, and that creating better environments requires courage from all of us, not just those with official authority to make policy changes. The legacy of that morning continued to ripple outward, inspiring other companies to examine their own cultures and empowering employees everywhere to believe that their voices matter. Their experiences are valid, and their dignity is non-negotiable. Sometimes it takes just one person willing to stand up and say, "Enough," to transform an entire organization, proving that true leadership has nothing to do with job titles and everything to do with character.